Thank you for joining us for this portion of the virtual XLH week. I have the pleasure of introducing Kyle Bryant and Sean Baumstark. Sean and Kyle are both affected by a rare disease called Friedreich's ataxia, FA. FA affects their balance and coordination, significantly limiting their physical abilities. Despite this rare disease, Kyle and Sean have completed several long distance bike rides, including the world's toughest bike race, Race Across America. Kyle has also written a book called Shifting into High Gear, which charts the course of Kyle's transformation as he journeys on a recumbent tricycle across the United States in the throes of FA. Together, they host a podcast called Two Disabled Dudes, where they interview leaders in the rare disease community, Paralympic athletes, notable psychologists, and accomplished public speakers and authors. Their podcast is about setting sights beyond the challenges in life and dreaming big, making a plan, and then executing like mad. Please welcome Kyle and Sean.
All
Hey,
right. Thank
hey.
you. Fantastic. This is so great. We are the two disabled dudes, and we produce a weekly podcast, and we've both been diagnosed, like the intro said, with a rare disease called Friedreich's ataxia. But really, where Sean and I connect is our proclivity to live life beyond circumstances in whatever life throws our way, whether it's a rare disease, whether it's, just getting out of bed every day, we want to live beyond circumstances, and that's what our podcast is about.
We are excited to be a part of the XLH week, and we're honored to be a part of the conversation today. Over the years, Kyle and I have experienced the power of support and connection through events just like this one, in person, virtual, getting coffee with one or two people, whatever it may be, where we have the opportunity to discuss our challenges, celebrate our wins, however big or small they may be, and of course, collectively explore the ways in which we can move forward in life. We're honored to dialogue with a group of amazing individuals today, closely connected with the XLH community. We'll take a moment to allow each of them to introduce themselves. On the top of my screen, I have Susan. So, Susan, would you mind starting us off? I'm hoping I'm not the only one not hearing her. So, Susan, we'll come back to you, I promise. Since everybody knows you, we'll give you a moment to get comfortable. I'm gonna head down here,
Sure.
bottom screen. Joe Beth, would you mind stepping up?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jo Beth Souza. I live in Louisville, North Carolina, and I have two children. I have an 18-year-old son who attends Wake Forest, and he does not have XLH. But I do have a 13-year-old daughter who was a spontaneous case. We diagnosed her when she was approximately 18 months old. And so I am here on the panel today as a caregiver. And I also am a member of the board of directors for XLH as well. Cara Beth was slow to walk, which is how we diagnosed her. She was in towing and dragging her left leg whenever she was learning how to walk. And I had gone with another family on a trip to the beach, and they had a son that was about the same age as Cara Beth. And we were just comparing developmentally the children and how different their son was compared to Cara Beth. He was toddling everywhere, and KB was not. And so we talked to that family, and they suggested that we just, take her, pay our copay, and go see a specialist and see if we could figure out what was going on. And fortunately, we actually saw an orthopedic doctor, and he did a simple blood test and identified that her phosphorus level was too low, and he was the one who was able to diagnose her and tell us about her disease. And so when I left the office, I started spending some time researching on the internet, and I found the XLH network, which is how I got to the network.
Awesome. And Joe, we are going to talk about this in a little bit, but just so everybody knows, your wonderful daughter is an amazing soccer player despite XLH. I love that so much.
Yes, actually, I am not in North Carolina today. I'm in Virginia at a soccer tournament, and her
Nice.
team has won 2 games already today, which means we get to play for the championship tomorrow. So good
You know,
Love it.
times.
there was a part of me that thought, man, her room looks like a hotel. It's so neat and pristine, and everything is perfect, which is
Yes,
the style
I
I
had
like
maid service.
right my wall. It
Yeah, I had
looks
maid
great.
service about 30 minutes ago, so it looks very nice. Looks much better than it did, about an hour ago.
Yeah, no, everybody. Sean lives in a hotel too. So, all right.
I could only wish. Jason, let's move on to you, my friend. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your connection?
Yeah, so my name's Jason Grant. I'm 37 years old, and I live in Columbia, Missouri. I was the first person in our family diagnosed as a spontaneous case when I was 18 years old. Um, I'm finding that's later than when most people are diagnosed. It wasn't for lack of effort. I was in and out of orthopedic doctors' offices and wore Forrest Gump braces for maybe 4 years or something, probably from the ages of 2 to 6. And remember learning to ride my bike on those, and in those, on top of various other things with my bones and feeling pain is some of the very first memories I have. Um, after I was maybe 6, I started to have, or no, that's a lie. From the very beginning, as soon as I had teeth, I started to have a lot of dental problems. And I would say that was probably the one that really stood out to me, that I knew none of my other friends had. Because I hadn't been diagnosed, I just assumed everybody else hurt as well. Anyway, jump forward, when I turned 18, it was obvious I needed a little bit of help or I wasn't going to be able to work. And that was when really we found an orthopedic surgeon who looked at some x-rays and found out I said, they don't look right, you aren't shaped right. And that's how I got diagnosed. After that, we'll move on and say I also have a daughter who did inherit XLH from me, and she's had a much different path than I did because she's been able to receive some treatment and been on Crysvita, and that's really nice to be able to look forward to the future. Besides my daughter and I that have XLH, I'm married, and then I also have a 15-year-old son, and all of us really like living in mid-Missouri and enjoy spending time outside riding bikes, maybe going on hikes or doing a little bit of kayaking whenever we get a chance to. That's kind of a little bit of a rundown on us, and I think that's all I got.
Jason, in the middle of there, you said something about, no, that's a lie. I've had, issues ever since. And I feel like toward the end, you said your wife, your 2 children, you love living in central Missouri. And if there was ever a stronger lie to ever come out of somebody's mouth, I feel like that would be it.
No, there are worse lies. It would be, I love living in middle Iowa.
I feel like I should clarify, not to pick on Missouri, but I did spend 4 years of college in Springfield, Missouri, and I'm happy to be back on the coast.
Well, that's where I spent my first 33 years, and I'm happy to not be there.
Fair. Rachel, thanks for joining us. Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure.
I'm Rachel Jones. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with my family, my husband, and my 2 kids. I have a son who is 9 and a daughter who is 7. I was a former teacher and administrator. I also volunteered as a board member with the XLH network, and most recently was the executive director before returning to the education field as a textbook editor. My mom was the first in our family to be diagnosed with XLH. She was a spontaneous case, and she passed it to me and my brother. I also have 3 nieces who have XLH, and then both of my kids have been diagnosed with XLH. And when I was growing up, little was known about XLH. And honestly, because I had never met anyone outside of my family, I just assumed that it was something that only affected our family and that we were the only ones in the world that had XLH. Um, and so, not wanting to be defined by XLH, I really pretended for most of my life that I did not have a rare condition. And so I focused on things that I enjoyed doing. I especially focused on doing well in school because that was something that I could control. It was something that was not impacted by XLH. And that's how I lived most of my life, even into my young adult years, just pretending not to have XLH and believing that it was something that only affected my family and I, until I eventually found the XLH network. And that's when I first met people outside of my family who actually have XLH.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Susan, I assume that you got your audio working, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. This time you can hear me, right? Yes. Okay, great.
Yep.
I'm Susan Fados. I'm the current executive director of the XLH network. I live in California. I was diagnosed at 18 months old. I'm a spontaneous case. Nobody in my family has it. And my story is very similar to Jason's and Rachel's in that most of my life growing up, after the initial, diagnosis, initial treatments, I did pretty much ignored it as much as I could. That came to a halt when I had a surgery, and this was before they had even the KFOS or the Rocaltrol treatments. I had my tibial osteotomies, and when I came back 6 weeks later, my bones hadn't healed at all from the surgery. And this was 40 or 50 years ago, so it was a long time different than Rachel and Jason's stories. But so what was supposed to be a 6-week healing period turned into about an 8-month healing period. And that was when we really started learning a little bit about what XLH was and how this was going to affect the rest of my life. But then again, kind of forgetting about it and pretending I didn't have it seemed to work real well. So I did that as much as I could up until about my 40s or so. And then I found the XLH network online. I think as soon as I got the internet, that was one of the first things I Googled, was vitamin D resistant rickets. And we didn't have Google then, but anyway. And I found this network, and it had all these people that were talking about XLH. And my experience then was that I had spent so much time in kind of denial and avoiding my illness that it was exciting and terrifying to see all these people talking about their symptoms and what had happened for them. So I kind of, for the next 10 years or so, kind of bounced back and forth. I would hop on the network webpage whenever I needed an answer or had a question, and but I would bounce right back off again, close my account even, and I'm not doing this. And finally, when they had an XLH day very close to me, I decided, well, I really have no excuse. It's literally in my backyard here. So I went to the XLH day, and many of you have heard me tell this story already, but I was so nervous. I drove around the block like 5 times before I went in. And from there, I met my very first person who had XLH and started volunteering after that day, became a member of the board of directors, and now I'm here today doing this with all of you. So it's been a really exciting path, especially after I found the network.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Susan. I'm thankful that You didn't drive around the block more than 5 times, that you finally got it out of your car and started to connect with others. In fact,
too.
I think we'll start there with the first question. This will go to both Susan and Rachel. You both shared a little bit about, Rachel, you talked about how you were the only one. It only affected you and your family. Susan went on for years and years, probably with the same mindset, thinking, I'm the only one. Rachel, would you mind talking about that tipping point where you decided to either use Google or whatever it took to connect with the others? What was the tipping point, and why did you venture out beyond your own family?
Yeah, it happened when I became a parent, and we received a diagnosis that my son that he was positive for XLH, and he was a little over a year, and I was pregnant with my daughter and knew that it was possible that she had it. So something just clicked in me. Those of you who are parents can probably understand just that. Oh my, I can't pretend that I don't have this anymore. I have to find answers. And so I did everything I could. I looked online. It took me a while because I hadn't heard of it being called XLH before. I knew it as vitamin D resistant rickets, and I wasn't finding much, but I kept looking. And then that's when I found the XLH network and found that they were having a meeting 2 weeks from the point that I had found that. So I quickly booked tickets without thinking about it for my husband and I to attend. And I remember I told myself, I'm going there to find information for my children. I'm not there because I need information. And that's part of my stubbornness. I didn't feel like I don't really need this. I don't need to connect with other people, but I do need information so I can give the best medical care for, so I could advocate for the best medical care for my children. And I even remember just a similar story with Susan's. I walked in and they had medical students that were volunteering. And without even asking me why I was there, they said, "Oh, your meeting is down the hall." And I remember being very offended, like, well, you could at least ask why I'm here. Maybe I was here to tour the medical school. And then when I walked in and I met people who had XLH for the first time outside my family. They were very friendly, but I was still stubborn, and they asked me. They didn't ask me if I had XLH. They just asked me when I was diagnosed. And obviously, I mean, if you have XLH, it's pretty easy to spot someone else with XLH. But I was still in denial, still pretending I am not here for me. So I don't need to talk about me. I'm here for my kids. And but over the course of that weekend and meeting other people and just hearing doctors share information, I was just blown away and honestly relieved as a parent to know that I didn't have to search so hard. There was information right here in front of me, and there are people who completely understood what I was going through, as well as what my children would experience. And so it was definitely a change, and I went from not wanting to be there to going home and quickly applying for the board, which they were very nice and denied me because they said, "We don't even know who you are." Thank you for being so excited to volunteer. So they said, "How about you volunteer first, and then we'll consider you for the board later." So that's what I did, and that's what led me to finding answers.
Well, Rachel, whatever put you in that room, whether it was for you or your kids, it doesn't matter, right? You're here now. You got in the room and you got involved, and that's what is important. I think, no matter what it is that gets us in those situations, it's important to connect with other people. Susan, I want to ask a very similar question to you. You talked about being very apprehensive and freaked out, and so I want you to maybe go a little deeper into that very moment when you realized that it was valuable to connect with other people.
Boy. Honestly, when I drove down to my first XLH day, I had sort of had the same attitude as Rachel. It was like, I'm just going to go and see what this is all about. I don't really need these people. And once I got through my terror, walking in the door and, following the signs that said, here's where the XLH group is meeting. I remember really clearly just standing outside the door, not wanting to go in and just being terrified of what I really don't know. And walking in and seeing all these.
You're good. We all understand exactly how you feel.
Seeing all these people that looked like me. And, I was 55 years old at the time. And I'd gone through my entire 55 years, never meeting anybody that had XLH or seeing anybody that looked like me. And I remember seeing Rachel sitting down and I thought, oh my gosh, her legs don't touch the floor either when she sits in a chair. And it was just like, this is so cool. So it was obviously a very emotional moment, about kind of a game changer in my life. I have recently retired and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with my retirement. And apparently I found a home for those years. But I was trying to come up with a word the other day when we were talking, and I just wanted to say that it was emotional and it was validating, but it was also really scary. And I just want to talk about that part for people that might be new to the community, because it is a little bit scary when you see, especially for the younger people now that I think see some of us older folks that didn't have the benefit of Cruzvita when they were younger. And I think that can be kind of a scary experience. So I just really want to encourage everybody, it's just never too late to find your community. It took me 55 years, but here we are.
There you go. I love that. And, I think that experience spans all rare disease and, maybe even more common disease too. But certainly Sean and I have both had a very similar experience when we were first diagnosed and when we discovered that the power of overcoming that fear and connecting with others. So thank you so much for sharing that. Jason, I want to move on to you. Sean and I are becoming more and more familiar with XLH as we have discussions with all of you, and it's very apparent that pain is a part of the experience. And one of the things that we were blown away by when we talked to you was that you said there was a part of you that's grateful for the pain. And I'm like, what the heck? That's kind of crazy. And so maybe if you could talk about that a little bit, because perhaps some of the people in the XLH community can relate with that.
Yeah, so that's a great line. I'm glad you brought it back up, because to hear somebody else say it makes it sound crazy. So thanks. However, because pain are the earliest memories that I've ever had, and they've been persistent my whole life, I spent a lot of time thinking about it and how it related to myself and to other people. And as I've grown older, my wife says I have a huge capacity for empathy. And I think that probably came from thinking about the pain that I had, and being something I didn't know how to describe or to talk about because it was part of me. I assumed that most other people felt the same stuff. And so I never knew how somebody could be so strong as to play sports, for an hour, whatever we might do, and then kind of keep going after that. Because for me, it was a big task, including not just after sports, but getting out of bed in the morning. So I just figured I couldn't be that. I just wasn't tough enough, maybe. So that made me realize that everybody has something they're dealing with that they don't know how to describe or to tell somebody about. So I think that's primarily why I'm thankful for it. With that being said, I would prefer to not have had it, but that's the good I've seen.
Understood. Thank you.
Jason and Joe Beth, I kind of want to go to both of you again with the question. In fact, even Rachel can speak to this if she like. But you both talk about being parents, or actually all three of you have. Jason, of course, you knew about it before you started having kids. Joe Beth, it was new to you. So, Joe Beth, let's start with you. What I'm curious about is, especially given the spontaneous sort of brand new diagnosis of XLH with your daughter, KB, what is something parenting an XLHer has taught you about life, or just parenting in general? Now, you don't even, like Kyle said, she's a fierce soccer player. So talk to us a little bit about maybe what your daughter has taught you about life.
Yeah, great question. And this is something that I saw as a trait, specifically in Carabeth, and it made me curious to know whether all XLHers had this personality trait in common. Carabeth's very determined and fiercely competitive. She's the child who, if she's trying to make 10 baskets in a row, she's going to stay out there until after dark until it's done, right? And I just was really curious about that. And so as I started meeting more XLH patients and people in the community, that was like a question that was kind of like, I would take them to the side and be like, okay, so tell me, like, are you really determined? And some people would be like, no, I'm just stubborn, or but there was like some commonality that XLHers are just, I mean, they're up against so much physically, that they just persist in accomplishing whatever seems to be set out in front of them. So I think that it was a huge eye opener for me. She stands 4 feet 9 inches and a quarter, don't forget the quarter. And so for her, watching like all of her middle school friends kind of growing up around her and getting taller, I mean, she does try and make up in personality and in spirit what she lacks in height, right? And when we see her on the soccer field and we're watching her, I mean, she just is fierce. Nothing seems to throw her for a loop, and she just keeps after it. So that's been, to see the world through her eyes has been a really interesting process for me to go through as a parent. Certainly, if I could change it for her, I would take it for her if I could, but I can't. And so, I think probably Jason and Rachel might say that they have a leg up on me because they do have the disease. So they have a great understanding of what's happening with their children. And I feel like I'm at a huge disadvantage because I don't have it. And so, I have to just really listen to her and try and be empathetic and understand and educate myself and learn as much as I can about any new changes that are happening with the medicine regimens or whatever it would be. So but yeah, I think I just see the world a little bit differently through her eyes because she is just so fierce and I mean, I'm going to use the word stubborn because she is, and very determined. So
I love that you talked about educating yourself. I think even Rachel mentioned, her initial journey was to become the strongest advocate for her children that she could become, and that takes a lot of courage and a little bit of humility, willing to admit that you don't know things and that you need to spend a little bit of energy and time getting in the know. Jason, I kind of want to throw this similar or a similar question to you, since you talked about your children being in the teenage years as well, and then we'll go to Rachel. Hers are a little bit younger. When it comes to parenting both your daughter and your son, how do you navigate the challenges that your daughter is up against, but your son probably isn't? How do you parent through those differences?
I don't know that I parent them much differently, to be very honest.
Mm.
I know that there's things that my daughter experiences that my son doesn't, with regards to how she hurts or how often she needs to go to the doctor's office or the dentist, and just a few more requirements. But being that they both have some different struggles, I really feel like I treat them equally for what their problems are. In our household, you spoke about like advocacy and stuff like that, and honestly, my wife takes the lead on being an advocate for our daughter. She does way better than I ever could imagine. I guess maybe the one thing that I can do for my daughter that maybe my wife can't, and something I don't have to do for my son, is I can understand the pain a little bit, that it's kind of a constant part of your life, and even when you don't mention it, it's probably still there. So my guess is that I have a little bit more patience for walking through that with my daughter than maybe my wife was initially. She's become much better at it, probably better than I am now. But I know that's
can
a
only
bad answer to your question.
No, that's beautiful. I can only imagine the the bond that you have with both your children. But Rachel, similar question for you. Sorry, Jason, go ahead, man. He doesn't want to play anymore. That's fine. Rachel, your children, I believe they're a little bit younger, maybe several years younger. And of course, yourself juggling a career and work and raising your children at the same time. What is something your little ones have taught you, or have you experienced any noticeable differences in the way that you parent your children?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have they're both affected differently. So they both have XLH. So it's interesting because I have different doctor appointments with my son than I do my daughter, just with different complications that they have. And they also handle things very differently. They have very different personalities. And so I have that, I have to balance the way I grew up was I'm tough, I'm going to make it through, I'm not going to let this affect me. And one of my children is very much like that, and the other is not. And we'll talk about everything, even things that aren't XLH related, like a paper cut is just the end of the world and is very dramatic about it. And so it's very hard because I have to learn to to have that compassion that Jason was talking about, and not go, well, just toughen up, come on, you've got to live life tough, because you're going to have a lot of struggles. And so it's very interesting. I'm learning every day, and I don't know that I always do it right, because I want to be the one who has compassion rather than just being like, toughen up over this, but because they have different personalities and handle things differently, I'm learning about my own parenting, and they're teaching me a lot. And sometimes a lot, I feel like a failure a lot of the times, but you know, you just grow and you learn. So they're young, and I still have a long way to go with parenting them and learning how to do the best by them.
You know, I think to be safe, I will admit I am not a parent, uh, but I will say that I believe, like you both said, you love them and you work through it. And something tells me that as long as you're loving them and working through it, you can't be doing it wrong. So
Yeah.
I'd encourage you to just keep loving them through it.
I mean, the other thing about that is that, like you said, John, I'm not a parent either, but what I do notice when I talk to parents, everybody feels like they're doing it wrong, right? And
yeah.
so I think that's a really powerful thing to voice that everyone can probably relate to, whether they're dealing with the XLH or not. So really appreciate that comment. So Susan, I want to go to you. You are the leader of the XLH network, and I know that puts a lot of pressure on you to feel like you need to take care of your community. And so my question is, how do you manage self-care with always needing to take care of the community as well? Is there a balance there?
That's a really good question, Kyle. You know, it's when I took this job, I was warned by a couple of different people that, you know, you have to remember that you're going to be doing XLH all day, and then you go home and you live or work at home and live with XLH all day. So it never really goes away. It's not like any other job I've had. And also because of that, for me personally, the ability to walk away from it at the end of the day emotionally has been really challenging, because I feel the need so much in the membership, and there's always more to do. There's never a day when I walk away and I think, okay, I'm done. There's always something more. There's always more that could be done. So that's just a way of kind of leading into your question, which is, so self-care has become very important for me because of that, for this job. So I try to get outside every day. I try to really manage how I take care of myself emotionally. I was a social worker for 30 years, a social worker and a mental health worker for 30 years. So I've learned some tricks along the way about letting your job go, but just doing something completely different, you know, turning on an old episode of the Golden Girls or something like that, just to get my head out of the day. Exercising is huge. Being around people is huge. And all this week, I think at almost all of our sessions, we've had a little bit of a discussion about self-care, and one particularly that was devoted to self-care. And I think reminding myself that helps too, because you get to a point where you think you know how to do it. You think, you know, I've got this self-care thing down. And then, for me anyway, and then I hear somebody's suggestion or a different idea, and I'm like, that's really cool. I didn't know that. I want to try that. So I think part of it also is just keeping open to new ideas for taking care of yourself. I'm lucky that I have the former executive director to talk to when I need to, which helps a whole lot. I appreciate that. It's a learning experience, you know, it'll be a learning experience the entire time I have this job.
I love that. You know, the piece of advice that I really love is, you know, just when in doubt, turn on an old episode of the Golden Girls. You know, I love that. Beautiful. Well, so we want to open the floor for Q&A from the audience. So if you'd like to ask Q&A, you can type it in the little box there at the bottom. We'll get to that, but what we want to do before we get there is ask each person if they have one piece of advice for maybe for somebody who is newly diagnosed. Like, what have you learned in your XLH journey, and can you boil it down to one piece of advice? And Jill Beth, we'll start with you.
So my first reaction to learning of Carabas diagnosis was certainly education, and found the XLH network. I cannot emphasize how important this organization is to somebody who is newly diagnosed, whether it's a child or as an adult. Great resources are available for education. Also, from a support perspective, know that you're not alone. There are a lot of people here who have been what you are going through, and everybody is more than willing and happy to help. So I would encourage you to reach out to anybody, somebody that you know at the network. Will be more than happy to walk through the process with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jason, how about you? Do you have a piece of advice for us or for everyone here?
Yeah, I would recommend getting in contact with people to help support you, like with the XLH network or wherever it might be. I think me, and like Rachel said, tried to do it alone for a long time and ignored it. And Susan loved getting connected with people. And I just probably started a year or two ago, and I wish I would have earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of what you're saying there is, recognizing that we can't do this alone. Like, that's not a sign of weakness. Like, that, maybe that's wisdom and not weakness, right? And reaching out to others, whether it's the XLH network or a mental health professional or a doctor or whatever you need, right? Recognizing that need and reaching out to others is part of what you're saying, I think. Love it.
Exactly.
Rachel, how about you? If you could offer a piece of advice for those tuning in today, what would you share?
It's very similar. I would say that though XLH doesn't have to define your life, you also don't have to walk this road alone, because there are plenty of people. There's a community in the XLH network. There are other people that can walk alongside with you.
I love what you guys are sharing so far, and Susan, don't think we forgot about you. But whether it's XLH or rare disease in general, what I feel like y'all are suggesting is connecting with others, not necessarily making everything XLH your life. You don't have to be identified by it, but having some friendships, connections, and willingness to talk about it here and there, that alone allows you to get the support or help or encouragement or whatever it is you may need along the way. I'm personally very careful not to, I don't put on a shirt every day that says I have Friedrich's ataxia. I live my life with that always in the background, but I don't let that identify who I am or what I can do or can't do, and that's that mentality and that attitude is certainly my choice, and we all have a similar choice. And I love that, Joe Beth talks about KB just playing soccer, and Jason and his family, you're just doing life, and Rachel, you're still working and raising kids and hoping you're doing it right. It's not like you're in a compound doing nothing but XLH stuff. Although it's very important and helpful, I love that each of you are continuing to live life in the way that you see best. So, Susan, we're throwing it to you. Can you share with us, whether it be, some that took a long time to realize the internet existed, or, didn't have those resources however many years ago, as a director, as a somebody that worked in the social services arena for a long time, what is something you might share with somebody you're just meeting for the first time that's maybe fairly new to such a diagnosis?
Good question, Sean. I think everybody's touched on it, but definitely not being afraid to reach out to the community. And again, also not just XLH, but the rare disease community in general. I had no idea until I started this how big the rare disease community is. And I've made some of my best friends through that.
Mm.
And you don't always have to have the same disease, but there's so many similar experiences. And then the other thing I would say is also keeping that balance. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, but again, we talked about how isolation doesn't have to define your life, but it is a part of it. But you also don't have to be at 24/7. You know, there's a balance there, in keeping healthy and emotionally happy, and just finding the right path for you. But I guess that's not really a piece of advice as much. I would say find your community and also find a balance is what I would say.
Great.
I love how the first part of your answer, I'll try that to a comment Jason made a little bit earlier. Everybody has stuff, right? We've all got challenges and hardships and opportunities, and we just work through it. And I love that you all have encouraged folks to just work through their stuff and find ways to live beyond those circumstances, whatever they are, and to empathize for others. You never know what somebody else is dealing with, and that's a takeaway for me. So I'm encouraged by what you guys have all shared today.
Absolutely. So we want to open the floor to question and answer. And so these questions can be for any of the panelists, for me and Sean, just a discussion topic that anyone wants to bring up. But we've got a few minutes, and we'd like to open the floor. So I don't have a view of the questions, so I don't know if Susan, you might, or Sean, if you have a view of those, somebody
Uh,
serve them up, or how does that work?
I don't either, but if they could put them in chat, in the chat box instead of the Q&A box, that would work.
Okay.
I'm not saying anything yet, though.
All right.
Wow.
And
While
go
that's
ahead.
coming together, and if we're able to get that up, great. We'll give it a little bit of time. But Joe Beth, I'm gonna just throw out another question while we maybe try to navigate through the Q&A functionality. Is Cara Beth your only child?
No, I have an 18-year-old son.
So what I'm curious about, I guess really anybody could answer it, but have you noticed, or over the years, what's the relationship like with siblings? Are there any
So ours is interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a 5-year gap between my oldest and Carabeth being the youngest, and of course Carabeth has has XLH, and so it's been interesting as a parent spending a lot of time on her health care. And I think that Evan would admit that we probably have spent more time, right? Like he is my low maintenance child. And she just requires more effort because of doctor's appointments, and she's had 5 double knee surgeries, and she's 13. And so it's been really interesting to watch, though, because Evan has always kind of taken to medicine and science, I think, as a result of it. When he has an opportunity to do a biology project, he does it on genetics. And how genetics look like for our XLHers, right? How do you have it as a spontaneous case, and how do you pass the trait to the next generation? So he has definitely taken a strong interest in medicine, and I think that that's obviously a direct result of what we've been dealing with for Carabeth.
Nice. Jason,
I think
have
ours
you
is very
noticed?
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're very similar. That my son is older. He's 4 years older than my daughter, and yet we do spend more time on her healthcare than his. But as I've seen him grow older, he's very understanding of that, and I mean, he doesn't want any part of that. So, but for the most part, he's pretty accommodating to her. If she's hurting, he doesn't get upset at her over it. But I think they're pretty much very normal. Sometimes they hate each other, sometimes they love each other, and they usually just tolerate each other. So
That's how I feel about Kyle. Sometimes we're not brothers, but sometimes we do have some questions. But Rachel, can you speak to that sibling relationship briefly?
Yeah, so my 2 kids are very close together in age, and then because they both have the XLH, they kind of bond over that. But it's interesting because they approach it very differently, just based on their personalities. My daughter is, oh my gosh, she will talk to anyone who will listen. She'll talk to perfect strangers, and my son is more reserved. And so when she meets people, even at school, she asked if she could get up in front of the class and tell people about XLH, and her brother was mortified because he's like, why would you do that? Could you just stop telling everybody about XLH? And so it's very interesting to just see the way they approach life based on their personalities too.
Completely different personalities.
I think an important thing maybe to point out is that all 3 of you sort of basically alluded to the fact that it's not necessarily XLH that dictates the relationship, right? It's just who they are. And I love that. Like, we tend to see our disease and blame everything or attribute everything to our disease. And no, like, most of us are just people, and like, our disease is something that comes along for the ride, but we don't need to attribute everything to it, because we are all people. So yeah, wonderful.
So Susan, I understand that you might have a couple questions. If you don't mind posing the first one, we'll tackle a couple.
I do. I have quite a few here. So I'm going to start with this one. It says, please give your insights Please give your insights and thoughts about the future for those living with XLH and those who will be born with XLH. Is it bright? Is it gloomy? What's the future like?
it's got to be better than it ever has been.
On that? Go ahead, Jason. Or
I think the future has to be brighter than it ever has been. I definitely look at it that way.
I agree with Jason. I mean, we see these pictures now where children are doing so much better, and it's so exciting to watch. And I personally can't wait to see, when these little ones are 20 or 30 or something like that, and how they're going to be, what this discussion will look like in 20 years. I think it will be really different.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have another question. It says for people that have mobility issues due to XLH, especially if they turn 40, How do you manage those issues if you have them, or how have you seen them managed?
So I'll speak to just mobility as a whole. That's something very relevant to the world of Friedrich's ataxia as well. And thankfully, I'm still mostly ambulatory, but I walk with some severe gait disturbances. I often lean on walls. I broke a leg last year and had to use a wheelchair for probably 8 months and a walker here and there. I would say for me, what's been most helpful is giving myself the permission and accepting the fact that I might need a little bit of help. Not necessarily from other people always, but just tools, whether it be a cane or a walker or a chair. Those things ultimately are designed to help improve life, not to restrict it. So I don't see a wheelchair as a restrictive thing. Now, to be fair, I haven't lived in one permanently, but for the 8 months that I had to rely on it, to me, it was a symbol of freedom and further independence, more of a sign of something's wrong.
Same
You guys want one
experience
more
with me.
question?
Yeah,
Okay,
next one.
Okay. Okay, so how do you find a balance between not causing more XLH pain and letting the kid live like every other kid?
Ooh.
I think what she means, I know I spoke with her about this earlier. So do you let your kids just do whatever they want because you want them to have that balance as other kids do, or do you protect them from the possible falls and trips and injuries?
That's a really good question. And I can jump in on that one because growing up, I loved to dance. And I remember my mom having to balance that. And I kept injuring myself. But I loved it so much. And I remember her even asking the doctor, could you just tell her to stop dancing, that she's not allowed to dance because she won't listen to me. But the doctor just said, that's he was into sports, and he just said, I can't tell someone to not do something that they're very passionate about. And so I have taken that approach with my kids as well. Inward I may cringe when they are wanting to do things that I think they could get hurt. Both of my kids are in karate, and sometimes I'm like, don't stretch their legs so much. Don't let them do that. They could get hurt. But I keep that inward because I do want them to not constantly have to think about XLH and be limited by that. Now, if they want to sign up for tackle football, that may be a different conversation. But for now, I'm trying to let them live life as much as they can, and we will deal with what we have to deal with.
Beautiful. Anyone else have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I encourage my daughter to be as active as she can be. I kind of described my path that I've had really good success with my osteotomies, and I was able to return to activity over a long period of time. And then I feel I'm getting better and better, and I feel very fortunate for that. But it's taken a long, slow progression to do that. So for her, I encourage her to work through what pain she can and be as active as she can, and tell her if honestly it does become too painful at some point to tell me, and if something's too painful at school, I can take care of it. If she just says everything's too painful, that's I tell her we can't do everything's too painful, but go slow and steady, and you'll get more. That's how we approach it.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a balance, right, between pushing them to experience more and and keeping them safe. Yeah, that's and once again, I think the answer is that there is no answer, and it's a struggle for everybody, right? So, yeah.
Kyle and I have a dear friend in the pharmaceutical world, not personally impacted by rare disease, but he constantly talks about our limits. And his philosophy on life is you never know what the limit is until you cross it. And not that I'm advocating we all go out and cross a bunch of limits, but I like the idea of pushing it a little bit. And like you said, Jason, maybe it takes a long time. And maybe we just try a little bit different or we work up to it. But finding those limits, I think, is important. And whether you're 40, 70, or 12, I think that's a valuable way to cautiously but intentionally pursue life. For all of us, I know we're at that mark of wrap up for this time frame. And again, I'm so incredibly honored and grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. And I don't know about you all, but I am shocked that we just spent an hour talking. Like it feels like 10 minutes. Like we still have more time, right?
Yeah, no, I think part of what Sean is saying is, when he says we're grateful, it's because we see such incredible value in conversations like this. And everyone's got the opportunity, as you guys pointed out earlier, to connect with others in the community and continue this conversation. I hope that listeners and viewers got some value today and recognize that this conversation can continue between others in the XLH community.
JoBeth, Jason,
Sean,
Rachel, Susan, thank you very, very much. Susan, we'll give the floor to you.
Sean and Kyle, I just want to say on behalf of everybody here and everybody who's been here all week, you guys have been fabulous. And I've just heard rave reviews about the men's group and your being here today, and also in all these rehearsals we've done. I can't thank you enough for being here and being part of our XLH week.
Thank you. We have a soft spot for sure in our hearts for the XLH community, so it's an honor, absolutely.
Here's to a face-to-face connection 2021. Fingers crossed, right? I do hope you all enjoyed the rest of your day, your weekend, and the year of 2020. Again, Susan and team, thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean and Kyle, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you at home for joining us for this virtual XLH week. We hope you have found it informational, inspiring, and entertaining. We would like to thank all of the presenters, panelists, and others that have contributed to the success of this event. If you enjoy programs like these, we ask that you consider giving to the XLH Network. You can do this by accessing our website at xlhnetwork.org and clicking on the donate button. We also welcome any feedback and suggestions you may have about speakers and what information you would like to see and hear at future events. I want to give a special thank you to the XLH Network's Executive Director, Susan Fatos, and the network's Administrative Assistant, Trista Heilman, without whom this would not have been possible. Don't forget to come back at 5:30 p.m. Eastern for our social hour, which will include awards for the Cross Country Challenge, app game winners, volunteer recognition, and much more. From all of us at the network, thank you for being part of XLH Week 2020.